Hello everyone, I'd like to welcome you all to the Chartered Institute of Linguists webinar, DipTrans, a Candidate Success Story, presented by Olivia Morton, a full member and Chartered Linguist of CIOL. My name is Sahela Phillips and I'm the Events and Networks Manager. During this webinar, you can ask questions by posting them on the questions panel just to the right of your screen. Then at the end of Olivia's presentation, we will have some time for a Q&A session. There will also be 3 polls at the start, so we'd be grateful for your participation. All attendees will receive a certificate and a link to the recording within 2 working days, and CIOL members can log this webinar on My CPD. But for now, I'd like to welcome our guest speaker. Hi, Olivia.
Hi, Sahela. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the introduction.
Oh, thanks for joining us. I'm going to now pass controls over to you, and I will confirm when we can see your slides.
Okay, perfect. Can you see my slides?
Yes, I can. Thank you.
Okay, brilliant. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. I'm Olivia. I'm going to be presenting about the DipTrans, and the title of my presentation today is A Candidate Success Story. Sahela and I were hoping to have my webcam on today, just to make everything a bit friendlier and more personal, but unfortunately, we've had a couple of technical issues with that. It was affecting the signal strength. So we're going to try this with webcam off, but here I've got a photo of me and my dogs, so you have a face to put to the name. So by way of an introduction, as already mentioned, my name is Olivia and I provide translation services primarily from German into English. I also offer Russian into English translation services, but in sort of recent months and years, I've been really focusing more on my German to English combination, as it's sort of much closer to my heart and a much stronger language pair for me. Yeah, I'm proud to say that I'm a Chartered Linguist. I'm a member of the Chartered Institute of Linguists, as well as a member of the Institute of Translation and Interpreting, and a member of the German Federal Association of Interpreters and Translators. Before I chose to register for the DipTrans exams in 2021, I did gain quite a bit of professional experience as a translator, so I was by no means new to the profession, and I will go into that in a little bit more detail later on in the presentation. I'm also pleased to be able to say that I did actually pass the Diploma in Translation, all 3 units of it on my first attempt, which I was delighted to have achieved. I achieved 2 merits and 1 distinction. So my merits were in the general paper and the social sciences paper, and I achieved a distinction in business. Now, I think as delighted as I was with that achievement, having learned from the process of preparing and learned from the process of reading a lot about the exams and talking to other translators who've taken them, the exams again, I could actually perform better from the knowledge which I'll hopefully be sharing with you today. So a little bit about my business. I specialise in providing written translation services to my clients. And my clients sort of mostly operate in the fields of marketing, jewellery, luxury goods, and the pet industry. And I also have particular interest in the field of business. So I really enjoy this aspect of my business in terms of sort of working on quite a wide range of translation projects. And in particular, I really enjoy helping my clients essentially transform their marketing materials from German into English, not only translating the content, but also really making those marketing materials effective in English and appeal to an English-speaking audience and to English-speaking customers. So hopefully that's enough about me. Now, here's what you can expect from the webinar today. So firstly, I'll attempt to provide an introduction to the Diploma in Translation as a qualification and provide you with a detailed insight into why I personally chose to register for these exams, and also how I feel I achieved success in the exams. I'll also go into a little bit about exam preparation, how to go about that, and the general benefits of adding the Diploma in Translation to your portfolio of qualifications as a translator and as a linguist. And if you have any burning questions for me or would like to just make any comments about my presentation or about the Diploma in Translation in general, please just make a note of them, because Sahela will give us all an opportunity to ask some questions and have a discussion at the end of the presentation. So I really hope that today in the webinar I'll be able to give you a bit of an insight into my personal experience of taking the exams. So not just really the nitty-gritty of of the technical aspect of the exams, but more how I found it, and hopefully that will be useful for your experience. Another really important aspect of what I'll try to do today is show you how I feel you can use having achieved a qualification like the Diploma in Translation to demonstrate the value that you as a linguist provide to your clients. Now I think we're ready to skip to the poll. If Sahila, you'd be happy to put those questions up, please.
Sure. Okay, so starting with the first one. If you have previously taken the DipTrans, how many units have you passed? So the options are 1 unit, 2 units, all 3, or none. So I will give everybody a few more seconds to select their choice, and then I will close the poll. Okay, so I will share.
Perfect.
So we have 52% have not passed any units, 36% have passed all 3, and 12% have passed 1 unit, with nobody has chosen 2 units. Okay. Then
brilliant, thank you.
I will launch the second poll. So are you seriously considering registering for the DipTrans in January 23? Yes or no? Okay, I think everybody has selected their option. And we have 53% have said yes and 47% no. And then the last question, do you feel ready to take the DipTrans? Yes or no? Okay, just a few more seconds and I will close the poll. And we have 75% say no and 25% say yes. Okay.
Thank you, Sahila, and thank you, everybody. That's really interesting. I think I know these polls can be a bit of a pain if you just kind of want to sit and watch a webinar whilst you have your lunch, but ultimately it's so useful for the presenter to be able to get a bit of an idea about the audience. I think it's really interesting that there are so many of you who have actually already passed all 3 exams here today, so it'll be fascinating to see whether you agree or disagree with both my experience, but also my perception of sort of how you can prepare. And hopefully for those of you who haven't yet passed any, who have only passed 1 unit, there will be some useful material in terms of nudging that success along and improving upon that. And I think it's brilliant that such a large number of you are seriously considering registering for the exam in January 2023, because and I assume that the rest of you are perhaps interested, either you've already passed it or you're perhaps interested for another later date in the future. And question 3 is fascinating because I think it's so subjective whether or not you feel ready to take an exam like the Diploma in Translation, because I think imposter syndrome can come in there, and also perhaps feeling either overconfident or underconfident in your abilities. And hopefully today I'll really give you the opportunity to have a think about where you're at. Okay, thank you very much. So I'd just like to give a bit of an introduction to what the Diploma in Translation is. So if you look at the qualification specification provided by the CIOL, the Diploma in Translation is described as the gold standard for anyone wanting a career as a freelance translator or to work as a translator for international corporations worldwide. And the CIOL comments that it meets the need for a high-level professional translating qualification. I think it's really interesting here that in that quotation it's kind of pitched as almost an entry point for anyone wanting a career as a freelance translator or to work for international organisations. And I think that's interesting, but I would argue that it's not necessarily a starting point requirement, but it's more a way to stand out from the crowd and to raise your profile as a linguist. I think you could have a very successful career as a linguist and as a translator without this qualification, but adding it to your portfolio is a great option to stand out from the crowd in a fairly competitive market. And I definitely agree that the DipTrans does meet the need and is sort of almost a gap in the market So to speak for a high-level professional qualification in written translation, which has a real practical focus on issues that you may actually face when working for clients. It's also really interesting that the diploma in translation has quite a long background. So it was first offered in 1989 and has taken it around 40 countries around the world. And I think that, yeah, that's really interesting that there's such a sort of long and successful story behind the qualification. It's also an off-qual regulated and internationally recognised qualification, which is something that we'll touch on again later. But I think the regulated aspect of this is very interesting against the sort of backdrop really of our non-regulated profession, where essentially anyone can actually call themselves a translator, and whether or not that sort of makes you a translator can be a really grey area. So I think an opportunity to stand out from the crowd and really say, no, I am a highly qualified translator with this internationally recognised qualification. And of course, the international recognition is absolutely vital given the international nature of our profession. Also, of course, passing the diploma in translation entitles you to use the denomination DipTrans after your name, which gives you sort of added professional credentials, and also entitles you to apply for CIOL membership, which naturally gives you access to the community that involves and also sort of professional standards to adhere to. So let's move on to the format that the exam actually takes. So many of you will know this, but I think I'll just dive into it in a little bit more detail. So Unit 1 is a written translation of a general text. This can be quite daunting for candidates because by its very nature, the text is general, making it quite difficult to prepare for. But I have sort of noticed that there really is a focus on kind of current and past news topics. And I think focusing on this area is really worthwhile during preparation, as is focusing on text with a kind of relatively high and formal register. And crucially also practicing producing text like this in your target language, which is something that we'll touch on again a little bit later. Unit 2, if you didn't already know, is a written translation of a semi-specialised text in either technology, business or literature. Of course, it is beneficial if you do already have the sort of bonus of specialising in one of those areas already. And Unit 3 is a written translation of a semi-specialised text in either science, social science, law or arts and culture. Interestingly, arts and culture has been added newly for this next exam season in 2022 to 2023. So yeah, I would say when you're choosing between these options in the units, really look to your existing specialisations. While we're talking about the exam format, this is a good time, I think, to mention some of the things that the examiners really will focus on and drill down on when they're assessing your work. Some of the aspects that they'll be focusing on are comprehension. Of course, as we know as professional translators, your understanding of the source text needs to be impeccable. And this needs to be conveyed in the translation that you produce. They'll also be looking at accuracy, which is another real cornerstone of sort of work as a professional translator. They'll be looking to check that you have transferred things like names, dates, places, numbers, those kind of relatively boring but very crucial things that are really easy to slip up with, both under pressure and perhaps just make a tiny mistake, which can crucially affect the accuracy. They'll also be looking at the quality of your target language, so things like grammar, syntax, cohesion, how your translation is organised on the page, spelling, punctuation, register, kind of markers of target language quality and quality of any language like that. I would really note that, as is the case for translators in general, it sounds like this is all about perfect understanding in your source language, but also crucially excellent language skills in your target language. So make sure that you don't neglect your target language when you're preparing. And so the purpose of the DipTrans, as defined by the qualification specification, really candidates with the skills you need to achieve excellent performance in the global business environment. It's about providing opportunities for progression and career development, about providing this internationally recognised qualification I've already touched on, and about sort of providing candidates with this global outlook and kind of less concrete concepts like aspiring and pursuing international career pathways. I think I would slightly disagree with the first bullet point in the perhaps the wording. It doesn't necessarily equip you with the translation skills necessary to achieve this performance, but rather you need to demonstrate that you have already achieved those translation skills to acquire the qualification. And I think that this really demonstrates as well this global outlook aspect, that the process and purpose of the qualification is really about inspiring linguists to progress, to improve, to dedicate themselves to their own skills and their own study, and also to succeed in their careers, whatever direction those careers may take. Now, if we look more specifically at preparing for the diploma in translation, CIOL tells us that this qualification is a high-level professional qualification set at master's or postgraduate level. It also notes that it's the responsibility of each individual candidate to ensure that they're sufficiently prepared for the exam, competent in both the source and target languages, have very good writing skills and the ability to translate quickly and very accurately at a professional level. So I think I'll just touch on some of these concepts a little bit more. What's really interesting here is that the qualification information itself very much focuses on independent responsibility for preparation. So when you purchase your exam registration, when you pay the fee and sign up for your exams, you're not purchasing any coaching or classes or any sort of course of preparation. You're sort of purchasing essentially entry and access to the resources that CIOL provide. It's then down to you as a candidate to ensure your own preparation. I think this independent responsibility is really important to bear in mind as I continue with the presentation. And of course, as we ascertained in the poll, that can be so subjective. 75% of you said, no, you don't feel prepared. And I do wonder why that is, whether that's your language skills, or whether that's sort of you don't feel you have sufficient knowledge about the exams, or whether it's something else. And I'm hoping that through this webinar today, we can nudge that figure slightly lower, or hopefully significantly lower than 75% of you feeling unprepared. As we can see here as well, there's a real focus on language competency, both understanding the source text and producing excellent quality writing in your target language. That's absolutely crucial. Of course, accuracy, that goes without saying for us as well. What's really interesting here is that it mentions the ability to translate quickly. I think this can be really off-putting when you look at the exams, because you think you're going to be in some kind of absolutely mad and furious typing marathon for the entire time. I believe that if you prepare properly and have a great strategy for the exams, you shouldn't be under absolutely crazy time pressure, and you should have plenty of time to check your work multiple times. And whilst you do need to work efficiently and you do need to get started right away when the exam begins, I don't think that there should necessarily be a crazy rush. So try not to be too put off by this ability to translate quickly. In terms of what preparation is recommended by CIOL, this also looks quite off-putting when you first see it. So this qualification is classed as a diploma, and the total qualification time and expected hours of study is 460 hours. So most of us are incredibly busy people. We're probably working full-time, we might be self-employed, we might be employed, we might be parents, we might have caring responsibilities, we might just enjoy our hobbies. So we also have plenty of other things to do in our lives. So of course, 460 hours of prep. Please correct me in the questions if I'm wrong at the end, but I think that's about 57 or 58 8-hour working days of preparation, which is absolutely vast and really does show both the value of the qualification, but also that it isn't to be underestimated. And I would say that this 460 hours, it sounds really quite off-putting, but it's also just the tip of the iceberg in the sense that it doesn't naturally include kind of years of cultural immersion, the years spent honing your skills as a translator, potentially, maybe internships and trial and error in your career. Also the time it takes to learn your languages, maybe your first degree, any further degrees, any other language qualifications or any other subject-specific degrees or qualifications you may have in your areas of specialization. So I think this can seem really off-putting, but it's just a guide, and the number of hours that you should really be looking at studying and really looking at preparing is so individual, so personal, that I wouldn't recommend that you allow this sort of really daunting figure to put you off or take it to heart. It's interesting that CIOL recommends that you undertake a preparation course of study. This isn't something that I personally did, although I can definitely see both the pros and potentially the cons of doing that. When we're looking at figures like this, 460 hours, and everyone says it's quite a difficult qualification, it can be really off-putting, but ultimately, one thing that's worth bearing in mind is it's good that it's difficult because it makes the qualification something really worth having. And when you do achieve it, it makes you feel both proud that you achieved it, but also really does set you apart from perhaps maybe other linguists, or maybe even demonstrates to yourself that you have achieved that level and achieved those skills. So I think whilst you're preparing and taking the exams, the level of difficulty can be off-putting, but also the level of difficulty is by its very nature what makes this qualification so worthwhile, I would say. I would also say people come to this exam from so many different backgrounds, but I would personally say that a degree in sort of an undergraduate degree in languages alone isn't enough without significant additional experience. And I would personally say that practical experience of translating for clients and translating for, maybe having your work reviewed by colleagues over a number of months or years is probably better than training or study when it comes to exam preparation, but also for kind of key objective concepts like your readiness and your confidence when it comes to the exams. Although another aspect which is worth considering is that one advantage of coming more recently from education is probably that you're more likely to be kind of confident taking the exams and be more familiar with this sort of mode of assessment. So there are definitely pros and cons to both approaches. Now, when I took the exams, it feels like quite a while ago now, but it was very recently, I took 2 on one day. So I think it was Unit 1 fell in the morning, Unit 2 fell in the afternoon, and then Unit 3 fell in the afternoon of the following day. So they were spaced out quite nicely. There's plenty of time to take a lunch break in the middle. I also took a walk to sort of reset my brain, go out and buy some lunch or coffee, just generally get away from my screen and get away from my office. People say it's sort of this exhausting marathon, and I think that really is a personal feeling, but I think it's tiring but not exhausting. I think it is very achievable if you have the right preparation. It also feels to me a little bit like a driving test, in that you feel you may have made one mistake and you start to panic because you think, oh gosh, that's bound to be a fail. I've definitely made a mistake in that paragraph. I'm not sure quite how to translate that in the perfect way. You think, oh, it's all over. But my advice would be very much approach it like exactly what they tell you for a driving test, when they say, if you think you failed, just keep going anyway. Which is very similar to my driving test when I was sort of reversing around a corner to do that manoeuvre, hit the curb the first time and thought, wow, that's bound to be an instant fail. Corrected my manoeuvre, hit the curb again. Thankfully, I was not deterred. I did actually pass my driving test first time. So I think it's very much you do need to keep going when you make a mistake, because chances are that mistake won't be as bad as you think it is. One thing that I actually did, I'll touch on again later, but on the evening between after the first 2 exams and before the 3rd exam, I actually went out for dinner in town with my partner, primarily because my daughter and the dogs were away, and we thought actually it will really just take my mind off sort of exam stress, just get out of the house, forget about the exams for a few hours. Ultimately, you've probably been sort of accidentally almost preparing for this for most of your life thus far, so cramming for one evening is not necessarily going to be helpful. I will touch a bit more on my preparation now, but I just will note as well, I don't really want to offer advice because it's so personal, and it really depends on your background and how you're coming to this qualification. But I'll just simply sketch out the approach that I took, and hopefully that will be useful and helpful for you. It really will depend on how much experience you have, how quickly you work, what your specialisms are, whether you feel sort of confident in one category for each paper, your own personal weaknesses and strengths. As I've mentioned before, I would absolutely recommend not neglecting your target language. The crucial thing for preparation, I think, is to absolutely scour the CIOL website and do all of the exam papers that they provide in your language combination. Do them all under exam conditions if possible. And when you've done that, you can create yourself some more past papers, which I will talk about. I personally think it's really important to sort of make it as easy for yourself as possible and get organised. Just do simple things like get yourself a folder with everything organised in there, print off some past papers, make it easy for yourself. And one crucial thing which really helped me was to schedule my preparation. So from when I started preparing to when the exams took place, I scheduled something for each week in which I could make time to prepare. I scheduled my time and I blocked it out in my diary. And I really think that, so I arranged for my daughter to either be with dad or with my parents on sort of dedicated Saturday mornings, my exam prep for kind of months and months on the weekends. And now I appreciate that I'm really lucky to obviously have that childcare available. and that perhaps not everyone might be able to create such large chunks of time. But I think wherever you can, even if they are relatively small blocks of time, try to make it easy for yourself by blocking out that time in your diary and making it, within reason, non-negotiable to do your prep. At the end of the day, it feels easier once you've started. If your target language, is English, I definitely recommend subscribing to The Economist for a few months beforehand, or a similar publication, both for the language and the exposure to that kind of register that offers you, but also for the general knowledge, if that's an area in which you feel you may have a bit of a weakness. Now, when I'd exhausted all of the past papers on the website and I wanted to do some more practice, I sort of essentially fairly randomly printed off a load of newspaper articles in my source language, which is German, and I worked through those like past papers. I picked them on topics that I was less familiar with, which kept it quite interesting. It kept my preparation fresh and topical, and it's also a really useful place to find text to work on as practice, because that's often the kind of place that the exam paper text will come from. So when you're preparing, I would say to absolutely dig around on the CIOL website. There is loads on there, and there are absolutely loads of resources and loads of information and loads of handbooks. It can be a bit tricky to really feel like you've sort of navigated it properly and dug around and found everything. Things on there. So the DipTrans handbook, the examiner reports, the past papers, the candidate recommendations. I'd recommend going through all of those kind of with a fine-tooth comb and looking at what information you can extract from them. You can also read about what people have to say about the exams online and sort of attend webinars like this one. But I would say take the advice you get, including mine, with a pinch of salt and apply common sense, because every experience and every translator is different. Ultimately, you will know best where your sort of weaknesses and strengths lie and how best to prepare. I also think that scheduling and making a habit of reading source language newspapers and magazine articles, even if you aren't going to translate them, but in the run up to the exam over the weeks and months before it, if you can actively read them, and by actively read them, I mean look at kind of tricky or awkward passages you think might be difficult to render in your target language, and just have a think, how would I translate them? Even if you're only thinking about it for 5 minutes, 2 minutes, just getting used to solving those kinds of problems and that kind of linguistic register will pay dividends when it comes to the exams. A crucial tip that I have for preparation is to practice with your paper-based dictionaries. Now, this is one thing that's likely to be a bit of a struggle for you, as was for me. If you've been working as a translator for a while, you're very likely to be quite used to relying on electronic resources. And that's one way in which I would say the exams are sort of slightly behind the times in terms of how translators actually work. But I can also imagine that it must be almost impossible to actually invigilate and regulate the use of online resources. So I expect that that's very, very complex. But what is brilliant as well is that the exams are obviously massively catching up with the very accessible online format. And I think that the fact that the resources are paper-based, unless you are perhaps an exception to the rule, this does make it much more cumbersome, and that does make the exam more difficult. So I think doing your past papers and translating your newspaper articles using those paper-based resources is really the best thing you can do. You can use the examiner reports that CIOL publishes that I've already mentioned to see common errors that candidates made in the past papers and to see if you made any of these. If you didn't, that's brilliant. But have a look at the errors anyway and try to figure out whether you may have made an error like that, or perhaps whether it's a similar trap you could fall into with another text. And if so, what's going wrong and where are candidates making mistakes, and try to see how you can benefit from this. I also made notes on common errors that candidates made from these examiner reports, and tried to really have a think about how I could use that information to improve my own translation performance. Right, so when it comes to actually taking the exam, I can also provide a bit of information today about sort of exam strategy and some general tips. But again, please do note that this is just based on my own personal experience and my own experience of translation as a profession. So please don't worry if you feel that you would prepare or approach the exams very differently. I'm sure that you know yourself best as well. So when you go into the exam, my personal recommendation would be to read the text in full. quickly and very quickly decide which option you're going to take in the unit. If you have more than one option available to you due to your specialisms, try to limit the time you need to make that decision to, I would say, 5 minutes is an absolute max. Then you're going to read the text, look up a few keywords if you have to, but only really to aid understanding or avoid misunderstanding at this stage. If anything comes to mind, if you think of a really nice solution to a complex phrase whilst you're on your first read of the text, by all means, jot it down on paper or on the screen. And you might well find, if you're quite practiced at this, that they might come to mind. I would say then, once you've read the text in full, not to put too fine a point on it, but hash out a very quick draft. Don't worry about quality at this stage. I know that's the opposite of what everyone says, which is you must check your work, but this is just the first draft. Don't put the pressure on yourself to produce a perfect piece of polished translation at the first attempt. Just get something down on paper. Once you've started and once you've got something down, I really personally find that that helps me to improve my work, because I'm not sort of paralysing my brain by striving for perfection on the first attempt. Once you've done that, once you've got something down on paper, a rough translation, whether that takes you half an hour, whether that takes you an hour, that depends how quickly you work and how you translate. But I would then say, literally dedicate the rest of the exam to checking, improving, and checking and improving, and checking and improving. And just to do that then for the rest of the time, until they say, the time's up, your exam's over. I think by doing that, you avoid the frustrating situation of not having finished the translation when the exam's over. But you also take some pressure off yourself to achieve perfection at the first attempt, which is, often difficult and unrealistic in most contexts. And yeah, in terms of sort of general tips, this is a really basic one and quite a boring one, but do go through the website and read all of the rules and regs about the exam in detail and have everything you need and more ready anyway on the exam day. I know that sounds obvious, but it would obviously be annoying not to pass for any reason, but it would be so incredibly frustrating to put in all of this work and then sort of fail on a technicality or accidentally break an exam rule and therefore fail. So just make sure you have your ID ready and absolutely everything that they ask for, and that you understand the exam rules. Yeah, as I've mentioned, I think that one of the key routes to success in this exam is scheduling your prep, your sort of revision essentially, and your practice sessions. We all have busy lives, and it's just so easy to put off, especially when it seems quite a daunting task. And even if you don't have the full time you wish you could have to prepare, I would say just do the prep, do as much as you can, and try the past papers, and try smaller blocks of time for preparation. If scheduling whole mornings or whole evenings is impossible for your personal situation. But I would recommend you sit down to do the exam past papers. Doing them under exam conditions also probably means dedicating the full exam time to them. So try to schedule some larger blocks of time for those, and then some smaller blocks of time for some other work. And yeah, visualising essentially the weeks you have left really does help focus the mind, and does make you also realistic about what you can achieve in the remaining time. So just do as much as you can in the time that you have available to you. But also don't be too critical about yourself, because you've probably also been inadvertently preparing for this for a long time. Yeah, do the boring bits and bobs like the demo exam on the website, to check the format, check your access requirements, and your computer meets all the requirements CIOL requires to provide the exam to you. Yeah, wherever you can, use some reading in the specialist areas you're less confident in but considering using in the exam. And I would say to choose your specialist areas in advance where possible, in advance of the exam, that is. But depending on your particular professional interests, there may be a backup option if there is a second paper you potentially could take. But ultimately, just pick one and don't kind of faff around during the exam choosing, because a lot of people do say this leads to them running out of time and ultimately to them failing. So I think plumping for one option and doing a good job of that is better than sort of dithering and then perhaps not leaving yourself enough time. And just to get to a sort of more personal point, why I personally chose to take the diploma in translation. So I took the exams in January 2021. My daughter was born in March 2020. So when I was preparing, I did have quite a young baby at home, and I did find that personally challenging. Now, for my particular personal situation, I'm very busy as a translator. I'm sort of fully booked all the time I have available to work most of the time. I didn't feel it was logical or made sense to me personally to take, perhaps a year or even part-time out of my schedule to do a master's in translation. And that just wasn't something I could commit to in my personal circumstances. But I really did feel that I wanted to prove my practical translation skills really to myself, so under time pressure and under exam conditions, rather than kind of studying translation theory or writing essays, because I think it was the practical translation that I love and that I wanted to prove to myself that I had that skill set. I also wanted a qualification fit around my situation as a new parent, as a busy translator, and as someone with a busy home and personal life outside of work. And I found that the fact that this qualification is fully available online through the CIOL Virtual Centre and the online assessment platform, that did make it very accessible to me personally in terms of childcare, also just the convenience and comfort factor of being able to take it in your own home or office. One thing that kind of played on my mind is the nature of translation as a somewhat unregulated profession. Now, I think that was really just in my head, to be quite honest. None of my clients have ever asked me to improve upon my qualifications, as I think they just judged me on my work and on my professional experience. But as a member of an unregulated profession, I feel that this qualification and achieving this qualification really does prove my skills to myself and to others. And I kind of wanted to be able to take pride, essentially, in my own ability of gaining one of the highest translation qualifications, prove that to myself, prove that to some current and future clients. I think just on a personal note, just proving to yourself that you can still succeed in exams and kind of personal projects like this around work and around your own life. Also to challenge myself and kind of keep my brain active as a new parent. Of course, registering for the exams does really focus the mind and it really creates time pressure to study. And that sort of created time pressure to essentially, improve upon my own skills and reflect on my skills. And I think, having thought in preparing for this webinar about why I chose to register, it really was for me more about recognition and sort of pride in my own achievements rather than career progression, because I was quite happy and I'm quite happy with where I'm at in my career as a translator. So I think it's more about, it has been more about kind of proving those skills to myself, which of course is really personal, and your reasons might be totally different. I think some of the other reasons you might choose the diploma in translation is to sort of increase your confidence in your own ability as well. It's also great for verifiability. So I won't play it now, but after this presentation, if you click on this YouTube link, you find a really easy way to add your diploma in translation qualification to your LinkedIn profile. So clients or people that may potentially be interested in working with you in the future can just quite simply click on the button in the info section of your profile and verify that you have got that qualification. So I think that verifiability is really important, particularly in this unregulated profession. Of course, another reason to choose the diploma in translation is that if you're kind of weighing this qualification and a master's, it can be quite cost effective if you pass first time, and depending what choices you make in terms of your preparatory work. But of course, that is really difficult to comment on because it depends how quickly you do pass. You may choose to take this qualification as well to launch your translation career in the first place, in which case, what an amazing way to start. You might choose to take it to get access to the CIOL resources and community and membership. It might just be a personal project to force yourself to study and improve. What's really good if you are starting out in your career is that it's intended to replicate the challenges that translators may face in their work. So I would say it's a very practical qualification by its very nature. You might just want to add the post-nominals, the DipTrans bit to the end of your name, and that might be another reason to choose the qualification. You might choose to do it as well to apply for full, to be eligible to apply for full CIOL membership. There are many reasons, and they're very, very varied. But I think there are huge benefits to sort of taking and passing these exams for your career and for you as a translator. The confidence one, I think that's a big one, especially our profession can be quite lonely. And when you perhaps aren't maybe encountering other translators' work as much as you wish you were, or you perhaps aren't really coming into contact with so much feedback on your work as you wish you were, that can be kind of really a confidence boost. to obviously pass this exam and to logically know and logically be reinforced in your view that in actual fact you are a really good translator. Of course, as I've already mentioned, is the gold standard qualification, the professional translating qualification. And I think there are definitely benefits because of the international recognition. There are definitely, as far as I'm concerned, or as far as I'm aware, areas or countries in which being sort of highly qualified or achieving a certain standard in your academic career is perhaps perceived as more important or seen as more of a baseline standard than in the UK. And that really allows you to meet that requirement. Perhaps that might come from potential clients or it might come from colleagues. But yeah, it allows you to demonstrate your dedication, to demonstrate your skill and ability. But not only your ability as a translator to just churn out an accurate text, what it demonstrates is that under exam conditions, you are personally able to add value to online resources. So it sort of brings me to, well, yeah, here's my experience. So this is the email that I received when I received my results. So I was very excited to see that subject line. Well, actually, I was a bit terrified because when I saw the subject line, it didn't really give much away. And I thought, oh my gosh, I'm so failed. I'd kind of forgotten about the exams by this point. But thankfully, eventually, I plucked up the courage to open the email and I did indeed pass. A while later, I received my certificate. So I've just sort of cropped out some of that there for you so you can see how that might look. Yeah, so I think with this in mind, you can really use the diploma in translation to demonstrate the value you as a linguist provide to your client. So it's not just about the professional credentials or the verifiability or the gold standard. It's also just about being able to prove your dedication to the profession, I would say. And it's also one thing to remember to tell your clients about. You can drop them an email and let them know. You can update your link path. As I mentioned, using that YouTube link, you can add it to your CV. You can call your clients and let them know. So it's a really good opportunity to also kind of touch base with clients and potentially also justify a rate increase. So I would say it's definitely something which can be used in connection with rate increases, and that's something that translators are often sort of questioning how to approach or how to justify. And this really does, I would say, justify improvement, perhaps. You might look at it in your profile or sort of progression of your skills. But crucially, what's so important, I think, against kind of backdrop of machine translation and sort of some people obviously are getting increasingly concerned about the threat of technology essentially to our profession, which I'm not really here to go into in too much detail. But one brilliant thing that this qualification does recognise and demonstrate is that you as a translator, you're not fully reliant on online resources. You don't rely on them at all because you've demonstrated you don't, because you don't need to use them to create a beautiful translation. And this really shows that you personally, as a linguist, add value to those online resources. And I think that's really very significant because it makes you and your skills a precious commodity, not the online resources. You're showing your clients that you can create nice, flowing, pleasant translation solutions to complex translation problems. That's under pressure and under exam conditions. So yeah, just if you can do that, imagine what you can do under less pressure with more time and more brilliant resources. Yeah, so you can essentially use this qualification to showcase your skills and be proud of that and let them speak for themselves. Sorry. Now, yeah, a few tips for exam day. It's brilliant if you can get your kids, potentially noisy pets, Amazon Alexas that might be about to pipe up, potentially noisy housemates or partners, and all potential disruptions out of the way. And I would say ideally out of the house if at all possible early on the day. You don't want any distractions. You don't want any background noise. I appreciate that not everyone can do this, but I did arrange for my daughter and dogs to be at my parents' house on the day and then overnight between the two exams. And I think that peace and quiet and that just ability to focus both on yourself and on the exams on the day is just so crucial to be able to approach this with no distractions. I would also say when you're preparing out on the exam day, just go big on the dictionaries. Get yourself, if you haven't already got them, the specialist dictionaries, the monolingual dictionaries, the bilingual dictionaries, the dictionaries of niche phrases. Just get the lot. Anything that you think might be useful to you. Or will be useful to you, and factor this into the cost of the exam. interestingly, I would personally say that hasn't been a complete waste of money, and that I have actually continued using them to some extent since I purchased them, which I wasn't expecting. Yeah, and ultimately on the exam day, make sure that you believe in yourself, because if you've got that far, you are almost certainly ready to take the exam, whether you pass this time or next time. I believe that if you're prepared, you will ultimately achieve success. Now, just before we finish up, there are a few key dates for 2023. So for your standard fee entry deadline, that's the 24th of October 2022. So you've got just over a month, well, a bit more than a month to still have to think about it and register for the January exams without having to pay higher fees. And the exam dates are the 17th, 18th and 19th of January 2023. Now, obviously, where this, which days and which times your exams fall on will depend on your language combination and sort of direction. And it's a long old wait until the results are released. That's not until the 28th of April 2023. If possible, just focus on some other projects in the interim. Stressing about it for a number of months obviously isn't going to change anything. I actually found it was long enough that I'd pretty much forgotten about it by the time the results came out, which was helpful. Now, of course, January 2023 isn't the only opportunity. They're also offered twice a year, every year in January and June. And I'm hoping that despite confirming that it is indeed difficult, I would say it's incredibly worthwhile, and I definitely recommend registering if you are a confident and experienced translator. So just go for it. If you feel confident and you want to prove your skills, the worst that can happen is that you have to retake one paper or more papers, and that's not the end of the world. If you're kind of listening and thinking, wow, I really just don't feel like I'm there yet, that's absolutely fine, but it might be worth looking at the new qualification, the DipTrans. Either if you're less confident in your main language pair, or if you're perhaps looking to test the waters with a language pair that's less well used. So I'd also recommend looking at that. Now, just finally, a few of the resources I've mentioned here I've just popped up on the screen for you. So hopefully Sahil will send this out afterwards as well. But that's obviously the main website for the diploma in translation. You've got the qualification specification there. You've got the preparatory notes, source text from past papers, and the information about the DipTrans, which is obviously the other qualification I just mentioned. So I'd just like to thank everyone for listening to the webinar, and hope that it has increased your confidence and maybe made you feel more prepared, or allowed you to at least assess areas in which you need more preparation, and hopefully inspired you somewhat to go for it with the qualification. So thank you very much. That's everything from me for now. I'll hand over back to Sahila, and I'll look forward to answering any questions that you may have in a minute. Thank you. Over to you, Sahila.
Thank you, Olivia. So we have had quite a few questions come in. So let's start with how long in advance do you recommend starting with exam preparation?
Okay, that's a really good question. I think we need to be realistic with that, because some of you, it really depends how much time you have. I would say use all of the time you have left to prepare. So if you're taking them in January, I would absolutely recommend starting now. If you sort of think about it for another couple of months and you decide to then register, I would recommend starting immediately that you register, or immediately that you know you're going to register, and try to count how many past papers you have and schedule those into the sort of weeks and days you have left. I don't think there's any one-size-fits-all answer I can give you that says you need 6 weeks, you need 8 weeks, or you need 5 years to prepare for it. I would just say what it's about is making sure you approximately have the skills that are required, and then wisely using whatever time you have between now and your exam to prepare and to get ready. So yeah, sort of try to go easier on yourself with that, because you can also only do what you can do.
Okay, thank you. With regards to law, for the law paper Unit 3, how best, so in your opinion, how best should candidates prepare for it? Because obviously law as a subject is vast and wide-ranging.
Yeah, I think that's a really good question as well. I think that does apply to law, but it also applies to the mythical paper in Unit 3, which I didn't personally take, just called Science, which of course, is about 10 lifetimes work in itself to become an expert in such a general field of science or law. But it's not about what we can take heart from is if you look at how the units are titled, it's a written translation of a semi-specialised text. So you obviously aren't expected to be, for example, if we're talking about science or law, a niche expert in all of those particular sub areas of law or science or technology as well as an incredibly broad field. What you are expected to have, I think, is good general knowledge, good experience of translating in those specialist fields or semi-specialist fields, and some very good and useful specialist dictionaries and specialist resources. So I think a lot of people are probably daunted by the sort of specialist nature of the papers, particularly probably those who are like me, coming at this primarily as a linguist rather than as an entrant from another profession, say as a physicist, say, and then becoming a translator. It can be daunting, but I think we take heart from the fact that it's a semi-specialised, and that if you've been translating in that field for some time, you really are likely to have quite a bit of knowledge that you don't realise you have, experience of solving those problems in that specific field when you encounter them, and also knowledge of which resources will be useful to you. I'm not sure if that does answer your question. I hope it does, but if not, feel free to add a comment back to Sahila and I'll try to add a bit more.
Okay, thanks, Olivia. How have you found that the units you chose have affected the type of work that you're approached for?
That's an interesting point as well. So I do actually get approached a broad range of work, and I wouldn't say that the units that I have actually taken have affected that at all. I would definitely focus on the areas that I have particular interest in, and if I don't have sufficient experience in an area, I would either recommend, I would either say that I don't feel sort of competent in that area, or I would refer a potential client onto a colleague. But I don't think that it has actually affected the nature of the inquiries that I received. I think I still received quite a broad range of inquiries, some of which I'm able to help with, and others which are not in my areas of professional interest. What it has affected, though, is definitely the kind of number of inquiries and the quality of inquiries that I've been getting, I believe.
Right. Okay. And do you usually state the units that you've taken and passed? So, for example, on your CV or on your website, do you actually specify the units, or do you normally just state that you have the diploma in translation?
If I'm honest, I think I specify them on my CV, and I can't remember whether I do on my website. I think I perhaps haven't got around to that yet. Okay. So I think I specify them on my CV. That said, I think what is a lot more useful in terms of my subject-specific knowledge and in terms of my specialisms is the experience that I have as a translator. So I think in terms of the actual specialist areas, I would tend to focus in my CV on the professional experience I have rather than on the particular units that I happen to choose. Only because, yeah, I think that probably gives more information about my skills as a translator. And otherwise the qualification kind of speaks for itself, and you're obviously able to provide more detail where possible. There are also quite broad areas, so your area of sort of niche area or your area of particular interest may be a lot more sort of drilled down and specific than the ones that the DipTrans sort of divides up the sections into. So that's really up to you. What I would mention though is if you have passed some but not all units, and I believe 12% of you have passed one unit, it's still worth mentioning that on your CV. So perhaps you've passed technology but nothing in unit 1 or unit 3. That's still worth mentioning because you can still tell yourself and your clients and anyone who's interested that you have excellent sort of translation skill in that area. So it's certainly worth mentioning the particular units, and definitely if you have sort of got your unit certificates rather than the overall certificate. Thanks.
Okay. Thank you. So I suppose this is connected, related to the previous question, but what is your experience with your clients' awareness of translator qualifications? And do they appreciate the fact that a translator is well qualified?
I think that varies so much. That's a really difficult one to say. I think that varies so much. I think it varies by country, it varies by company, it varies by individual, and sort of generally by mindset. I think, oh wow, it really does. You know, I have encountered agencies who perhaps don't necessarily view translators as being highly qualified individuals, but also agencies who really, really respect and value the service that we are able to provide. So that varies so much with agencies. I tend to find that direct clients know a lot less about what it takes to become a translator, in my experience. But I think that they're also usually very grateful for the service that they provide, because it's not something that they've, you know, it may not be a service that they've used before. So I think they potentially tend to sort of understand less potentially, but also because they don't have experience of the industry, you know, but also kind of realize that it is a skill set that they don't have maybe, but it just varies so much. You really do get everything. I think the main thing is, you know, really highlighting the value that we do add and the skill that is required and the time and the dedication and probably the money and the effort that we've put into acquiring these skills, and how we can help people and help companies and help clients and organisations with them.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So we've just got time for one last question. And for those who are starting out in the industry and they've just passed the DipTrans, can you just say a bit about what are their options? What can they do?
Well, you can, you know, if you're at that point, you're at a great point because you've got a brilliant qualification to start your career with. And you can really take that, well, anywhere essentially. You may stay in the industry, you may leave the industry, you may do any number of other things in the industry. So you may choose to be a freelance translator, you may choose to go and work in-house for a translation company, you may sort of work as a project manager, an account manager for a translation company. You might also enter another profession, so you might go to something like language teaching, or ultimately another form of writing, so journalism. You can take that in any direction that you want to take it. And what I would really recommend is definitely experimenting with different areas of specialism and areas of professional interest that you enjoy working with, and in which your clients appreciate your services. Because if you're just starting out, you've gained this qualification, you probably have a good idea of some areas in which you have some additional skill and knowledge, but ultimately it's absolutely fine to experiment and to try out different areas and see how they work for you kind of personally and professionally. So I'd say it's definitely a good time to branch out and try new things and see what works for you, and you can hone that and optimize it as time goes on, but ultimately just go for it. Once you've found your first clients, it's infinitely easier to find your subsequent clients, and eventually, you know, clients will start coming to you and asking you to work for them. So I think just getting started and just having the confidence to go for it and believe that actually you've gained this qualification, you have excellent skills and you have a great skill set and knowledge base to offer. So just, yeah, go out there and use it however it makes you happy, really.
Okay, well, thank you so much for your talk, Olivia. It's always interesting to hear a candidate's success story and any advice they can offer. So thank you to everyone who has joined us today and for your participation. There will be a survey that pops up once I close the webinar, so we would be grateful if you could provide some feedback. So thanks again, Olivia.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Thank you, Sahila, and thank you everyone for listening in. I hope that's been useful for you and beneficial. Enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Okay, I'll now close the webinar. Many thanks. Bye.